Well, in a recent video, I was asking for constructive feedback for my YouTube channel and comments about what you'd like to know more about of the different stuff that I've been covering on my channel. And somebody wrote that they were interested more in like my story and what 35 and retired means and how I got there. And so as the sun sets on my birthday, and I'm now 36 and retired, I thought maybe I would take the time to tell that story. And so yeah, so 36 and retired, what that means is that I pursued what's called FIRE, Financially Independent Retire Early, which is kind of a financial philosophy that you can read about if you'd like. And it's not really that complicated. It encourages people to live well below their means and to save a lot and to retire as early as possible and enjoy financial freedom while one is still young and vibrant and has a family to raise and things like that. And so the cold hard numbers for us were we had $420,000 saved and we had no debt. We had our house paid off, and we got our monthly expenses down to something like $2,000 a month. Now that's not the numbers that you need to retire early through the financial or through the FIRE plan, but alongside that financial plan, there's also a lot of spiritual development in my wife and my life. We're Christians, we read the Bible, we're followers of Christ, disciples, whatever term you find fitting without being distracted by all of the people who have carried that title and have gone astray, like televangelists. And so as we sought to put ourselves in a financial position that would allow us to give all of our time to whatever cause we felt the Lord was leading us to, he just increasingly made that clear that the time was approaching earlier than expected. And so in February of this past year, I was on a plane heading to Detroit with the company I worked for at the time, Volkswagen, and I was reading a book called Walking His Trail by Steve Saint, who's the son of Nate Saint, who's one of the missionaries who died in Ecuador with Jim Elliot. And I just read this book. I only got through about half of it, and it was just full of the kind of stories that I want to have when I die. Stories of adventure, stories of risk, stories of faith, stories of seeing God move in miraculous and unpredictable ways. And one of my favorite Christian authors or speakers, Paul Washer, says, I don't want to get to heaven without any scars. And so instead of pursuing comfort and convenience and luxury, there is a part of me that physically and spiritually pursues challenge and discomfort in the same way that a soldier may join one of the armed forces and go to boot camp, and to some extent appreciate and enjoy that process of growing and becoming resilient and strong and not needing to be coddled. And so, yeah, in May of this year, 2023, I resigned/retired from Volkswagen. And depending on how the market goes and things like that and overall returns on our investments, we have something like 15 to 20 years before we'll probably be broke. And so, yeah, I'll be 55 and broke. But at the moment, we have 3 children aged 6, 8, and 10. And I have come to revere fatherhood as my all-time most important job that I've ever had. And I've also taken the words of Psalm 90:12, teach us, O Lord, to count our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom, really to heart, and recognizing that my role as a father will dramatically change, both progressively as the children get older, but quite substantially when they turn 18. And so I began to count my days as a father, recognizing that when my son turned 9, as an example, that half of my parental role to a child was now over, and wanting to put as much of my time and energy and effort into being a world-class father as I could. And I know that parenting goes on beyond 18, but I think that it drastically changes. You become a friend and an advisor and a counselor voluntarily when they want it from you versus an instructor. And so actually on January 28th in 2024, my wife and I are going to celebrate basically the halfway mark of parenthood. So my son was born in March of 2013, and my youngest son will turn 18 in December of 2034, something like that. I can't remember exactly. And so the exact midpoint between when we became parents and when we will no longer be parents to children is January 28th, 2024. And so we plan on celebrating that. And so, yeah, we've, let's say, purchased this window of time where we don't have to work and earn income. I do still earn a little bit of income fixing small engines and things like that, and someday maybe this YouTube channel will earn some money, but yeah, it's kind of retired with an asterisk because permanent retirement, from a numbers perspective, we won't be able to permanently retire and never work again without some sort of source of income, whether that's an inheritance or YouTube money or small engine money or a classic job again. But yeah, so I'm a full-time dad, and we homeschool the children as well. And I'm a homeowner, and we own old cars that need work. And I also teach a Sunday school at our church, and I teach on Wednesday nights with the kids. And I'm a deacon at our church at the moment. I'm chairman of the deacons, and I'm on the missions board, and I'm leading a missions trip to Puerto Rico in March, and I'm going to India in June. And I'm also a neighbor, and we're called to love our neighbor. And I'm also an uncle to 3 wonderful nephews. And so just when you kind of look at all of the roles that you have in life, even if you don't have a full-time job, and if you were to take those roles as seriously as you possibly could and sink your teeth into those roles, not necessarily to the extent that society tells you you should, but really, if you just think about absolutely maximizing the potential in those roles, you can have a very full schedule without actually having a full-time job, and that's kind of the situation I'm in right now. And so, there have been times at the breakfast table where my children will ask a very deep, thought-provoking question. How can God be sovereign and yet we retain our free will? Or, if God loves us so much, then why did you just tell me, Daddy, about a 4-month-old girl who's having seizures and they might have to, cut the spinal cord to the left side of her brain and she lose half of her body for the rest of her life? How can you believe in a loving God when he lets people suffer like that? And so, because my kids aren't about to jump on the bus, and because I don't have to run off to a meeting at work, we can talk about those very serious questions when they're asked and when they have the attention span and the interest for those answers. And I'm not sure how many times a missed opportunity like that is represented or still available, but being a full-time dad allows me to maximize on those opportunities with my children as they arise. And I went through a phase where I absolutely hated my parents. I mean, 7th, 8th, and some of 9th grade was absolute hell on earth for me. I hated everyone, primarily myself. And, at that time, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And she was scrutinized and ridiculed for, sort of doing nothing all day while we were at school. And yet she spent a lot of time in prayer for me, and she read books about parenting and psychology and sociology, and she was in conversations with people who had had trouble with their teenage boys, and she got the housework done and the cooking done so that when I came home, even though most of the time I wanted nothing to do with her, she was available for me and she wasn't busy, so that when those questions did arise or when those opportunities for conversation did open up, her plate was empty and she was able to be there for me. And by God's grace, I have a great relationship with both of my parents now. We are individually, both of those relationships are extremely close and tight, and I love them, and I'm so grateful for their rearing of me and my sister. But those are very challenging phases to get through, and the tendency in the American society is to pack your schedule so tight that you don't really have room for much else. And so yeah, that's kind of the motivation. There's a financial motivation, there's a spiritual motivation, and that's kind of what it means to be 35 and retired with an asterisk. So yeah, maybe that's interesting to someone, or encouraging or inspiring to someone. maybe not. I would say, I started at Volkswagen at 19 years old, making $35,000 a year. 2 years later, I got a $10,000 raise. 2 years later, I got another $10,000 raise. And when I left Volkswagen, I was making around $95,000 a year, living in Tennessee. I bought a $155,000 house, and I've driven used cars for most of my life. And we buy clothes from the thrift store. We shop at Aldi. We make most of our own food. Um, and so if you're listening to this and you say, well, I don't make $100,000 a year, so I can't do what he's doing, I think that's the wrong response. What I would encourage you to think about is, um, and this is something I wrestled with quite significantly, is, what would it look like to live on half of what I make? And that may look like a lifestyle that you find very unappealing. I mean, my wife and I had discussions long before we had the money to retire. My wife and I talked about, I could quit my job at Volkswagen, I could get a part-time job, we could move into a trailer park. We had some friends who were living in a trailer park, and the amount of money they spent was just minuscule, and we could have one car, and we could have one cell phone, and we could have no Wi-Fi, we could go to the library. So if you look at all of the things you spend money on that you don't have to spend money on, it's typically a pretty long list. And the world will tell you that if you have a college degree, you should have a particular type of lifestyle. But, the world doesn't care about you. Companies, marketing companies, they don't care about you. They want your purchases. And so I think one thing that is sort of a universal truth that can be applied regardless of what you make is to sit down and really dream about what is most important to you. And for me, it was raising my family and being a full-time dad. And then you need to count the cost. And the cost may be, that you move out of suburbia into a trailer park. And that may be a real tough pill to swallow. But one of the things I would encourage you to think about is, there are people who live in $500,000 houses in gated communities with HOAs, and someone else mows their lawn, and someone else repairs their dishwasher, and someone else changes the oil on their car. And for them to downgrade their life and take on the lifestyle I have, where I live in a neighborhood with $200,000 houses and I mow my own lawn, that would feel like a major life downgrade. It would feel to them probably like failure. And their peer group of doctors and lawyers and accountants would sort of look down and scorn at them. And yet I can tell you that I live a wonderful life. And so for me to look at giving up my house and my yard and my workshop and moving into a trailer park, also feels like a major downgrade. And many of my peers would scorn me. And yet, I know people who live in a trailer park and they're living a wonderful life. Not all of them, but some of them. And so you have to be careful with your philosophy that you don't think to yourself that the standard of living you currently have is the minimum, and below that one can't be happy. Because in some ways that's a very arrogant stance to take. And so, so that would be kind of my encouragement to you. And maybe the last thing would be that there is a vast difference between doing something out of necessity and having no choice versus doing something voluntarily. The people who live, as an example, in a trailer park, they may be embarrassed about that. They may not be, proud to tell people around town about that. But that's ultimately largely driven by the fact that they may have no choice. They have no alternative. If you do have a choice, like myself in this case, to live in a $150,000 house in a nice neighborhood, and you voluntarily choose to drive a crappier car that costs you less money, or to wear thrift store clothes because they cost $1 a shirt, or to live in a trailer park because it costs, $350 or $400 a month, it doesn't feel the same as doing those things because you have no choice, because you're shackled to poverty. And so those things may not be as bad as you think. And so my encouragement to you would be, see how little of your income you can live on, and see how soon you can retire, and see how soon you can free yourself from the bondage of a job and an employer. And all I can say in closing is that I thought that I was free. I thought that I had a good life, and in some measure, of course, I did. But the freedom of having no debt, the freedom of having no employer, the freedom of having no job to report to, the freedom to go left when you want to go left and right when you want to go right, to drink a nice long cup of coffee with your wife and have talks about your marriage and what matters in life and your parenting, and to be able to talk to your children about the very tough and serious questions they have at 6 and 8 years old. It is a freedom I didn't know existed, and it is a freedom that is so sweet that I look back and feel like I had been a slave. And so I just want to say, as someone who's been now financially free for 6 months, that I have tasted, and it is good, and it is sweet, and it is worth it. And so if this can encourage you to push a little harder and dig a little deeper and be a little more resourceful and a little more frugal and resist, the Starbucks every day or the Chick-fil-A once a week or whatever, I would encourage you to do that, because there is no time like the present, and we don't know what we get tomorrow. And so count your days, that you may gain a heart of wisdom.